Hey gang, KR King of D&D Homebrew here. And today's episode, I'm going to be talking about what to do when a player can't make it for a session of your game. And the reason I'm doing this is I'm playing this tabletop game and a live game at a game store near my house. I'm doing a diary on this, and in this last session, we had a player who couldn't make it. And I had to make a decision as to how to handle this in terms of the game. And I thought I might make a good video to talk about the different ideas, the different methods that I've used when someone doesn't show up, and what the ramifications of those are, both good and bad for your game. But first of all, I'm going to talk about if you're a player in a long-term campaign, and let's say it meets once a week, and you can't make it one session per month, that's going to hurt the momentum. And if you can't make it 2 sessions per month, you shouldn't be in that campaign. It's just not for you're going to make it difficult for the GM, the other players, the party composition. They're depending on you to be there. You need to be thinking about a one-shot type thing or a West March style campaign where you can just come and you can go and it's no big deal. Because if you're developing a party, you're getting to know each other, not just as a party, but also your friends or whatever. It's just not fair for you not to show up. And the second thing is, if something comes up, it's best if you give warning. If you know you have a certain date, I cannot play on that date, and that's our weekly or monthly date. And by the way, if you play once a month and you don't show up, that really hurts things. But anyway, that's your day that you're supposed to play. You can't make it. Tell everybody. Tell everybody so that they can prepare for you not to be there. Because that way everyone knows that player X is not going to be there. The GM, we're prepared. When we end the session, it can make a big difference, as maybe we're going to end a little bit early so that we're at a convenient spot for that player not to be there, versus we don't know that. We just end wherever we happen to be when time is up. And suddenly the player says, oh, I'm not going to be there. And of course, give fair warning. You call up 10 minutes before. Really? You didn't know? I mean, again, unless it's an emergency. And again, if that only happens once every 6 months, no big deal. But if you have those kind of emergencies all the time, you should probably be thinking about another game to play. All right, so there's 3 basic options you can choose as a GM if a player is not going to be there. The first is that their character stays in the group and the other players, one other player gets their stats there, and runs them. And this can, it can have some advantages in terms of the continuity of the group and whatnot, but as we'll see, it can also cause some problems. The second option is to end somewhere where the player can be like in a city, a settlement, or some safe place where it's logical for that player character to stop for a while and the other players move forward and run in that session. This too has some issues with it, as we'll see. But it also maintains some verisimilitude that this player would not decide to go out for this session of adventuring. And the third option is to have the player character, wherever the players are, just magically disappear. They're gone at the beginning of the next session. No one says anything about it. They just move on. And in the subsequent section, wherever the party happens to be, that player magically reappears. Now, obviously, this is the easiest to implement, but it has some problems, not the least of which is the verisimilitude of someone disappearing and everyone acting as though they were never there or whatever. But it has some other ones as well, as we'll see. All right, so the first option is to have that player character be in the party. Now, this is the way for many years when I played with an ongoing group, same group of friends, basically for 20 years or something, in different permutations moving around. We would just have that character there and we'd run them. That one of the players would run them. And I had certain rules about this. You couldn't send, that person into the, this cave filled with smoke to see what's in there. They couldn't go forward. They couldn't be in the lead. They couldn't make dangerous choices. I was trying to protect that player character from the other players. And this wasn't a difficult thing. They weren't out to have them do it. But if you have someone like a rogue or someone who has a specific task, we want to remove that trap, and that's their job. If there's indications that this is super dangerous, I may step in. And I don't like to step in, right? I want the players to be making their decisions. I give them the evidence, they make a decision, but the player character is not there. This is their job. This is what they, like if you have a paladin or something and suddenly the players are playing the paladin that is letting things go by that a paladin would never go by, do you intrude? This can cause all sorts of problems, right? So you say, well, no, you should never do that. Well, if you have a campaign in which experience is based, in part on fighting monsters with that, divvying up treasure that you find and whatnot, that player is going to miss out, right? Well, you may say, well, that's their fault. They didn't show up for the session. But now you've got players falling behind, and you've got issues with the composition of your party. People have chosen characters or whatnot, and there's a balance here. So your healer is not there for 1 week, and they're the only person that heals. That's a big pain in the ass. What do the players do now? Maybe there's a town they can go to, and they've got money to buy healing potions or something. Maybe they're just going to chance it to see if they can get a short rest here and a long rest there. But boy, would it be nice if you had that cleric in the background, not taking any unnecessary risks, being run, but balancing out the party. The other issue here is if you run a campaign where people can die, where someone can come, a dragon can breathe on them, or a fireball, or just whatever, and you die when you're not there, that is a bummer. And the thing is, you don't want to be fudging stuff. You don't want to be going easy as a GM just because the player's not there. Because in all these circumstances, the player couldn't be there, right? Now, maybe it's some emergency. Maybe it's something that absolutely couldn't be avoided. But still, the responsibility is on the players to show up every week. So you don't want to pull punches. You don't want to have that fireball miraculously miss them. The player's been injured, the missing player. This is going to kill them, and it just doesn't occur because the players are going to notice this. Another thing about being a GM, players notice what you're doing. They can tell or think they can tell if you're fudging things or, playing favorites or whatever. Now, they might understand the playing favorite. They might even agree with it. Oh, that guy's not here, so that's why he's doing that. That's cool because the guy's not here. But you know what? It's not good practice. So you have to play it straight up, and that player may die. And if your character dies when you're not there, you're always going to feel a little screwed. You're always going to feel like if I had been there, I wouldn't have died. I would have done things different. They're going to hear the whole story. It's got to be explained to them what happened. It's one thing to have a rundown of all our great adventures and we all got this treasure and this. It's another to run down how your character got killed. Again, the chances of that, you might say, are slim in the 5e system with the death saves. I'm telling you, it can happen. It is deadly. The actual player has to agree, I want you guys to run my character because I want to be part of, the experience. I want to get a chance of the treasure. I want to be wherever you end up at the end of the session if you're not doing miraculously popping in. So I'm going to let you guys run it, but they have to know there's a risk. The next option is the dropping someone off at a city, town, or settlement the end of the session. And, this has, first of all, verisimilitude. Why aren't they there? Because they had something they had to do and we wanted to adventure. We talk about them. We act like they existed at one time, right? It all makes sense. It isn't just they're gone and, there's no explanation there when they appear. So it has verisimilitude, makes sense. A couple things here. One is you do have to end a session at such a place where this could be sensible. And sometimes this is why it's important for players if they're going to miss. They say, hey, I'm not going to be there next week. And we say, okay, now we might have to stop early or whatever. And that might irritate people. If you've got a 2-hour, let's say 3-hour session and it's 30 minutes to go, but you're at this town and what they're doing next is going to place them out into the wilderness somewhere. And what do? Now, maybe you just drop the player off there. That's it for you. And you can watch. I suppose you could go home. Probably they're going to watch, but we're going to go off without you and we're going to continue to run without you. That's a way to do that. The problem is when you come back the next week, where are you? Are you going to run the next week and go and do whatever and then come all the way back to that town? Now, that might be the case. Maybe you're running in a dungeon. You can come in and out of the dungeon anytime you want, so you just do that. Maybe it all makes sense. But if it doesn't, that player, how do they get back with the party? They're not going to know where you could sending some message. There may be means for you to do that, but they're going to wander across some, wilderness area all alone. No, they're going to have to wait till this group gets back to where they were resting. Again, it's on the player. The player decided not to make it or couldn't make it. The other players, they can't be responsible for that. But this can cause some problems. The other element here, too, when you have the missing player, of course, is the balance of the party that I talked about, which is a reason to have them in the group, is that, there might be some crucial bit of information this player knows, some skill, some check they could make, some knowledge they have, that when the players get to some critical thing that you've established, they're not going to be as effective. Now, you may change what that is because the player's missing, but, that's gets a little squishy there. I mean, you're setting all this up, you're creating this world for them to run in, and you want it to have consistency, and you want it, potentially to, reflect things that, that the players also reflect. And so you're having to change things around. Again, you can do that, adjust things for the absence of this player. It's a little irritating, but at least with the player being in some set place, we were acknowledging that that they're not there, that they actually exist. And the other thing about forcing the players to return is it can restrict their, following up leads or looking through things or investigating. They're in some dungeon and they find something and they want to see what's beyond here. And they've got, or if there's a ticking clock and things are happening and now they've got to go and they do this and then they stop and they got to go all the way back at some point before the end of the session to get the player. And they just say, you know what, I'm sorry, we have to do this thing, so you're just going to have to wait. While the other player, either they have to sit there for half an hour by themselves, or they may say, well, if, I'm not going to be there then if I'm not going to play. Now, again, that kind of player, you're better off without in a way because they chose not to be there. But maybe there was an emergency, so they'll come, but they're going to sit there for an hour because you don't want to restrict your players' ability to explore your world and take things to their conclusion. And then the final option is to have a character be in the middle of the game where you stopped and then they're gone. No one acknowledges that they ever existed, as it were. I suppose if someone says, oh, if we only the cleric were here that they were 10 minutes ago in game time, but really you're not really acknowledging them. You run and then wherever you are, they magically reappear. The advantage here is that you don't have to worry about going back for them. They just are there. This is a very common, I think, modern style of playing. I don't know if it's been influenced by the West March type approach or whatever, or just the fact that people can't make it to the sessions. I don't know, but, as I've seen both online and live, getting back into 5e, this is the way a lot of people do it. The problem you have here, obviously, the person not being there in terms of party balance and, knowledge and all the things I talked about. The other thing that you find with this strategy is that the player reappears, especially if they're in the middle of something. If it's a battle, this is really stark. But even if they're exploring something or whatever, they've gone through and they've done all this stuff, and suddenly this character's there that wasn't there, what do they know? And do the players you leave it to the players, you have to tell them what they know. But, and again, they're not going to know quite as much as you, the GM, when you were presenting it to the players. They might have absorbed more information here. They might have seen some critical clue. There might have been something that they didn't know, but the players have to tell them what's going on. And what effect is it going to be when they appear in the middle of this situation? So again, hopefully you stopped at a point, okay, this player's going to come back next week, so let's stop now 15 minutes early because we're in a town, we're in this place where it's so sensible for them just to appear. We don't want to be in the middle of a battle. We don't want to be exploring something. We don't, because it's going to be difficult to determine, because again, you just having them in the center of the battle suddenly, it's weird. It's like, and you just do it, obviously. If you have to, you have to. But this is an issue when they just magically appear. So maybe you set up a time where they're going to magically appear, in maybe a 15-minute thing or whatever, and you have them magically appear in a place where it makes sense. Even though it doesn't, because why would they be there anyway? But that's the issue here and why that lack of realism is such a problem. Now, in my campaign diary, when we stopped, we played up session 2, and a player had said, the Dwarven fighter, hey, I can't make it next week. He had told me this when we started the campaign. But they ran into these wargs and they were fighting. So what I did was a combination. I had the players run the rest of the battle that he had been in, finish the battle, and then I had him magically disappear. So you might say that's the best of all worlds, or you might say it's the worst, depending on your attitude, but I felt like I had to make that choice. I had to, he had told me this. The other thing is that these are new players to me. They're new to each other. He had said this. I didn't want to sow any kind of discord here. Everyone knew this was going to happen. I told everyone that this is what I was going to do. He was going to disappear. They said, okay. They were hurting without this Dwarven fighter. He's by far the best fighter, has the most hit points. He's their tank, and he was gone, a second level tank. But, right? But he couldn't be there, so I just decided I did not want to restrict the other players in terms of where they went and whatnot. The players ended. They're about to go into this underground thing, opened up with this evil ring and these gnome skeletons surrounding them. And there's going to be the dwarven fighter. How am I going to explain that? I'm thinking about that right now. It was only yesterday that I did this. But maybe I just stop for 10 minutes. Probably this is what I will do, I guess. And just have the players explain what's going on. And I won't say a thing. And he can ask questions of them. Give them 10 minutes or whatever. We don't want to take too much time. Explain what's happening. And there we go. Right. But would the dwarf have been fascinated by the emerald, the evil emerald? Would, he have said, well, I'm not going anywhere near that. We're not going there. We have this mission to do with the druid. What would they have said? Well, again, that's the issue. That's why, as a player, you want to show up for the game. And we understand that you can't all the time. But those are the kind of ramifications that occur when you're not there. Before I go, I want to promote my new podcast that I'm doing with Daniel Norton of Bandits Keep. It's called Monsters and Treasure, where we discuss everything D&D and other topics, mainly concentrating on tips and things we've learned over the years about being a GM. So check that out. I've got links below. I'd love to hear your comments, to call in on that. I love to play those. I just love to hear people, my longtime listeners I've never talked to, but anyone new that comes along. Also, if you like what you see on my channel, please subscribe. Always looking for more. Leave some comments. Tell me about the experiences you've had in terms of running a campaign. But most importantly, get out there and play the greatest game ever invented, Dungeons and Dragons, and tell somebody else about it.